Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. I'm Caroline Broussard, Chairperson of the North Region SELPA Community Advisory Committee, and we're so glad that you all could join us this evening for the second part of our two-part series on literacy. We are pleased to host a virtual roundtable discussion this evening among the 5 unified school districts that make up our SELPA: Albany, Alameda, Berkeley, Emery, and Piedmont. Before I introduce our moderator this evening, I have a couple of housekeeping items. The first, the chat is available and it is strictly, we're asking that it strictly be used to ask questions of the panelists. It is also being provided as an accommodation for people with disabilities who require it as a form of communication. Please limit the commentary in the chat to commenting on what you're hearing or to chat with others, as it will make it very difficult for us to pull the questions that we want to bring forward during the Q&A portion of the presentation, and it also takes away attention away from the presenters. So please just use the chat to pose questions to the presenters. The CAC has sent questions to each district, so each district will have 3 minutes to answer each of the questions for a total of 12 minutes per presentation. Eliza No has wonderfully volunteered to keep time for us, and will give a 2-minute warning when each district is nearing the end of their time. In the interest of time and giving each district equal time, we are presenting just the slides that we requested. The unabridged version of each district's presentation will be posted on the CAC website. Dinesh Kumar will advance the slides for us this evening, so please cue him when you're ready to move on in your presentation. And if you enjoy this presentation this evening, please consider joining the CAC as a voting member. During this evening, a membership application will be dropped into the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. Kathy Futterman. Dr. Kathy Futterman has worked in the field of special education for the last 30 years, primarily with students with language-based learning issues in a variety of public and private settings. She is an executive board member of the Reading League California as the Director of Higher Education, and was a dyslexia and reading intervention curriculum specialist for the California Dyslexia Initiative at the Sacramento County Office of Education. She's currently adjunct faculty at Cal State East Bay in the Departments of Educational Psychology and Teacher Education, in addition to being the district-wide dyslexia and literacy education specialist with Mount Diablo Unified. She also has a private practice in Contra Costa County as a professional educational therapist, working directly with students and their families. Dr. Futterman, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate tonight. I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline, for having me. And I'm very excited to be able to moderate this panel tonight. We are going to start with Dr. Mila Kell from Emery. She is the Director of Instructional Programs. So if her slides can come up.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mila Kell. I work for the Emery Unified School District as a Director of Curriculum and Instruction. And the following slides describe our literacy program. So the slides that you asked us to fill out began with the data. There's a mistake here, but I didn't correct it. It's 49.96%, not 40.96%. But yeah, so last year, 49.96% of our students met or exceeded standard in English language arts. Now, if you look at disaggregated data for grades 3 and 8, in grade 3, 54% of our white students and 55% of white students met or exceeded the standard in English language arts. 38% in 3rd grade and 41% of our Hispanic or Latinx students met or exceeded standards. 66% in 3rd grade and 74% in our Asian population. We have very small population of 2 or more races. but it's 57% and 56% for grades 3 and 8. And then our African American students performed at 34% and 34% again in both grades, 3rd and 8th. Students with disability, only 31% of students in grade 3 met or exceeded standard, and only 12% in grade 8. And socially economically disadvantaged students, 31% in grade 3 and 35% in grade 8. So as you can see, we do have a gap between white students, African American students, and students with disability and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. Our highest performing group are Asian scholars. However, we are a very, very small district, and our data are very volatile. So that's something that we need to take into consideration, because 1 or 2 students with the district our size can change a lot of things on our data. So this does not look very impressive, perhaps. However, considering progress over time, we actually did quite well from last year to this year. So next slide, please. Or do I? Okay. This is our 22-23 data. So now this is a different scale, because this data come from California School Dashboard. And we increased overall English language arts performance by 50.1% from last year to this, 50.1 average scale points in English language arts, not percent, not the same scale. For African American students, we increased their performance in English language arts by 12.3 points in average scale score. So although we're not anywhere we would like to be, we are working hard to improve performance of our students on smarter balanced assessment and overall academically in terms of their academic achievement. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are various curricula that are used in our district. So our core curriculum for grades TK5 is Reach for Reading by National Geographic, published by Cengage. And for 6th and 8th grades, it's teacher-created curriculum, a combination of novel study and non-fictional texts from Newsela. The same in high school. Also for Tier 1 instruction, our TK5 teachers use a variety of different resources, such as Newsela, vocabulary, brain pop, accelerated reader, explode decode. And also for Tier 2 students, we use LeadCamp by Scholastic. We use iReady, Starfall, and Seesaw. In grades 6 through 8, we also use LeadCamp, iReady, Epic, ResKids, and Starfall. For Tier 3 instruction, our teachers use a hybrid of Orton Gillingham language, 2nd edition, Explode Decode, Haggerty phonemic inverness, Read and Write for Google Chrome for high school. And in grades 6 through 8, teachers use Rewards reading system, and also use a lot of resources from Teachers Pay Teachers, Explode Decode, and Teachers Pay Teachers Phonics for older students, for those students who are in Tier 3. So we do see the need for more systematic approach when it comes to Tier 2 and Tier 3 curricula. And so We are considering for next year to provide training in Orton Gillingham for all the teachers, special ed and general ed teachers alike. Next slide, please. Okay, now this one deals with universal screening and progress monitoring. We use iReady in grades TK8 for universal screening. For program monitoring, we use Smarter Balanced interim assessments. We look at growth of Lexile, number of books read, etc. And we use programmatic assessments for program monitoring. These assessments are conducted 3 to 4 times a year, and the data are shared during teacher-parent conferences, via newsletters, and during PEC and DLEC meetings. We also use STAR in grades 2-5, 3 times a year. Some teachers use Orton Gillingham already, primarily in first grade, actually, but some teachers in other grades as well, 3 times a year. And in middle grades, teachers use Scholastic Phonics Survey and Basic Reading Inventory by Kendall Hunt for screening. Next slide, please. Okay. In terms of professional development plan, reading is fundamental, but our math data show that we really need to focus on mathematics even more. And there are only limited number of days for our union contract where teachers are released for the day to take professional development. So we are trying to be very nimble and creative with that. So we use a coach from Ask Education who works with all of our grades. Every teacher who is new to the site or to the program takes Reach for Reading professional development every year. And then Newsela training is on needed basis because many teachers took it many times, but they still are able to take it if they are interested. We are also doing another thing that is probably unique to our district. Every year we allow 10 hours, and if teachers feel that they need more, they can ask for more. But each teacher gets 10 hours of professional development of their choice. And we compensate them for doing it on their own time. So it's during the year and then 10 hours during summer. So many teachers, that way we accomplish differentiation for teachers and try to meet diverse needs of our faculty. But on top of that, we have this coach who comes and works with all the teachers and administrators as well. Our special education teachers will be trained in SIPs by the end of the year. And as I mentioned, we want Orton Gillingham for next year for all the teachers. And our administrators get coached by the coach. She used to be a literacy coach at ACOE, so she's very, very competent, and we're very happy with her services. And I think that is it. Can you please move to the next slide? I think that's it. Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of wraps up my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kell. Now for our next presentation will be from Albany Unified School District, presented by Dr. Frank Wells, who is the superintendent, and Michelle Sinclair, who is the Senior Director of Professional Development and Assessment. And just for those people who are joining and might not know what the original questions were that each district is responding to, the first question was, using your CASP 2023 data, what percentage of 3rd and 8th graders are meeting or exceeding state benchmarks, particularly in English language arts, and then disaggregate that data for each grade level, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic disadvantage, and disability, and then note the change year over year from 2022. Then the second question was, what English language arts curriculum is used for all tiers of instruction, and which, if any, are aligned with the structured literacy approach in the science of reading? And the third question is your district engaging in International Dyslexia Association aligned universal screening and curriculum-based progress monitoring? And the final question was, describe your 2023-24 English language arts professional development plan. So I just wanted to state that. And Dr. Wells and Michelle Sinclair, whenever you are ready. Thank
Let me ask a question. I just read in the chat that someone from Berkeley would probably have to leave because of baby duty. I'm okay with conceding or reversing the order and going after Berkeley and have them go next, because it would be great for everyone to get a chance to fully participate, if that's okay.
If Berkeley, are you ready? That would be Anikia Ford Morthell and Jill Hugendijk. Is that correct?
Yes, Jill Hugendijk and Anikia Ford Morthell. Thank you, Dr. Wells. He's always so gracious. We do have a member of our staff who just wanted to be around to be able to answer questions. So good evening, everyone. I'm Anikia Ford Morthell. I am the superintendent of Berkeley Unified, and joining me in at least the presentation of these slides is our associate superintendent of Ed Services, Jill Hugendijk. Next slide, please. So our mission here in BUSD is to enable and inspire our diverse student body to achieve academic excellence and make positive contributions to the world. And we, likely like many of you who are on this screen, understand literacy as a key lever, both to our students accessing various other content areas and achieving academic excellence, as well as for them to be ready and poised to make positive contributions to the world. So we appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel and to share what we're doing and how we're doing with regard to literacy thus far. So again, just thinking about the 4 questions that were asked, we are going to attempt to answer each one, though it will likely not be linear, so please bear with us. With regard to our SBAC data for 22-23, specifically looking at 3rd and 4th grade, there should be one slide before this, I believe, or a couple slides before this, actually. Can you go for it again? Okay, so yeah, there's quite a bit missing in this deck.
Yes, Superintendent Ford Morthell, we announced at the beginning, in the interest of time, that we are showing the slides that pertain to the questions for the roundtable, and the full unabridged versions of each presentation will be posted to our website.
I appreciate that, and I understand that there are still some critical slides that are missing, so I'll go ahead and just let you all know, with regard to ELA, and you look at the overall data, 70% of our students in elementary schools are meeting or exceeding standards in English language arts. And then when we drill down and look at 3rd grade in particular, overall, 70% of our 3rd graders are meeting or exceeding expectations. When we drill down even further and look at this data set by race and ethnicity, these slides show actually multiple different ethnicities, but what you see if you look on the left-hand side is that despite overall 70% of our 3rd graders being proficient in it or advanced, only 38% of our African-American students in 3rd grade are scoring at those levels. Relatively flat from the year before, 21-22, and a 10% increase from the 18-19 school year, which was our last data set. Additionally, when we're looking at race and ethnicity, we see a similar pattern when it comes to our Hispanic Latino students, relatively flat. And then a significant gap when you compare the performance of our Asian American students with our Black and Latinx students, as well as when you look at our multi-ethnic students and our white students in comparison as well. So we're very clear that when we think about these focal populations, that looking at those particular subgroups is going to be critical as we move again towards that mission statement. I do hope you all look at the other slides. We had quite a bit of information to share with you all about the work that we're doing. With regard to program, again, focusing on 3rd grade alone, our students with IEPs showed a decline overall for 22-23, and that is again, all of our 3rd grade students with IEPs. And then when we look at our English learners, we see a significant increase of about 12% for the 22-23 school year. And similarly with our Hispanic Latinx English learners, which was another focus group of ours, there was a 20% increase in their performance of, who met and exceeded standards. Next slide, please. And again, looking at the other grade level that this group identified, our 8th grade students, we see that 69% of our 8th graders met or exceeded standards. When we drill down by race or ethnicity, we see that 74% of our Asian American students met or exceeded standards on the last year's SBAC, and that's compared to 29% of our African American students. If you compare 21-22 to 22-23, you'll see that our African American students were relatively flat or actually made a decline of 3% with regard to the ELA SBAC. And then our Hispanic Latinx students had a 5% increase in ELA the previous year. Again, area of focus for our English, for our Hispanic Latino students and our African American students is focusing on literacy, and quite honestly for all of our students, because even that number of 69% or the earlier number that I shared of 70% meeting or exceeding expectations does not meet our expectations here in Berkeley Unified. When we look at our 8th grade ELA data by program, you can see that our students who have IEPs identified on this chart as SPED made significant gains in ELA in 8th grade from 15% to 27%, so that's a 12% growth. And then our students identified socioeconomically disadvantaged also showed growth about 6%. And then similarly, our students who are ELs grew 7%, and our Spanish-speaking ELs grew 6%. Just wanted to compare the same data points. Next slide, please. And I will let Jill Hogendijk speak to you about the curriculum that we are implementing. Before she does that, we want to be really clear that there is a lot of work that we are in the process that we're actually doing here in Berkeley Unified that started last year. When we started as a team, we've been together as a team for 18 months. And so we've done a lot to analyze our current curriculum, to understand the gaps, and to really make sure that we're moving our entire district towards reading and literacy instruction that is aligned to the science of reading. So with that, I'll introduce Jill Hogendijk.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here and to share with you a bit of our work. There are slides in the appendix because when we put this together, we were really also trying to contextualize the journey that we've been on, which is really important, particularly as we talk about the curriculum that is currently in use and where we're headed. So you can see here that Berkeley Unified is still using the TCR-WP units of study as our Tier 1 curriculum. It's important to note that over the course of the last school year, we engaged with an outside consultant to do a curriculum review that came as a part of a legal settlement. So in the context of that review that was conducted by teachers, we do recognize that there are some significant gaps in TCR-WP. You can find summary information about that curriculum review that was conducted both for TCR-WP and Fast Track on our district's website page if you just put literacy in the search bar. Our Tier 2 supports, you can see here, are Wilson and Orton Gillingham. And we do have some additional curriculum that we're using in the middle school, Inquiry by Design, Constructing Meaning. We have Read 180 and Lexia for our intervention classes, and then are also using Wilson and Lexia as our Tier 3 support. You can go to the next slide. Yep, and I'm trying to find where we had it here. In terms of our universal screening and curriculum, I think that this piece is important to understand. Number one, as we're looking at our work in BUSD as contextualizing that in the context of literacy systems change. And important to that are having valid and reliable assessments in order to measure student progress. So in the 21-22 school year, so prior to my tenure and our superintendent's tenure in the district, we had moved to using the Dibbles and the STAR assessment. And part of the work that has happened over the course of the last year and a half is to increase the use of STAR and Dibbles. And so we are definitely seeing those numbers increase. We're about at 95-97% participation rate at each of the benchmark windows. So our teachers in K2 use DIBELS 3 times a year as that screener, and STAR for grades 3 through 9. Students who are identified for any reading disability or reading challenge are now being progress monitored using DIBELS K8. We are at the tail end of a series of professional development, which I think is going to be on the next page. And so our teachers are going to be learning shortly about the core assessing reading multiple measures assessments that will be part of their upcoming training. Next slide. And finally, I think that the question was about the professional learning that we are doing in BUSD. Beginning in this school year, we have partnered with Core Learning to develop professional development and coaching on the science of reading and foundational literacy skills. For over 25 years, Core has pioneered evidence-based and research-grounded professional learning experiences and school supports that equip educators with tools that they need to advance instruction, high-quality materials, and effective assessments. Core has also had a long-standing history prioritizing evidence-based practices rooted in the science of reading. It was really important for us as we were developing and initiating literacy systems change that we shared professional learning for our educators. It had been over 14 years since the adoption of TCRWP that there had been any type of system-wide professional development. So at the end of this year, through the use of our professional development days, Berkeley has 2 full professional development days during the school year. In addition to using our early release Wednesdays, our elementary teachers will have completed 5 full days of the core training. We really felt like this was an important foundational move in order to ensure we were all grounded in the science of reading and the important components that are necessary for early literacy learning prior to going into a curriculum adoption. And so you can see here just the map of what our teachers have been receiving. In addition to this, our middle school teachers have participated in 2 days of the core adolescent literacy solutions training. So this they're supporting us with our professional development K8. And I do think, thank you, Eliza, 1 minute left. We did have a slide in there about some feedback that we were getting from our professional development. So I don't know if that is on the next slide or if this is the last slide. Otherwise, I'll read out some of those results. Yep, there we go. So you can see, although for some reason the colors went wonky in this slide, that overwhelmingly our teachers either agree or somewhat agree that the adult our learning with core has given them an opportunity to reflect on their practice. And again, overwhelmingly, that our professional development has helped teachers develop skills and strategies to support their practice. And while there have been, varying degrees because different educators are entering in, some are new to the field, some have a lot of experience in reading, but overall, a lot of thoughtful reflection on how they're using their learning to meet the needs of our students. And so that's a bit of a summary about what we're doing in Berkeley. And thank you, Dr. Wells.
Thank you both. That was very thorough. Thank you so much. I guess we'll go back to Albany and then go in the order as planned. So if Dr. Frank Wells and Michelle Sinclair from Albany would like to present their slides.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Frank Walls. I'm the superintendent here in Albany Unified School District. And our person who's leading this work is Michelle Sinclair, our Senior Director of Professional Development and Assessment. I had some comments I was going to make prior to the rolling out of answering the questions that were presented, but I'm going to table that for, I think, is more fitting for Q&A. And so, Michelle, if you'd be so kind to lead the presentation, that would be great.
Okay. Hi, thanks. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting us. I'm really excited and happy to be sharing our work that we're doing in Albany because we're feeling pretty proud about it. I'm going to start with the data as was directed. So based on Smarter Balance assessments, you can see that, well, as a district, all of our students as a whole, we perform at 76% in English language arts who met or exceeded standard. But the graph represents our third graders who are in the blue and our eighth graders who are in the green. And as you can see, we are a high performing district, and we do have subgroups who we would like to see some improvement with clearly. So here you have it. We tend to perform better at eighth grade than in third grade, which was an interesting kind of aha. And you can see the numbers are, we are struggling really right now. What our focus on is our English learners, our students with disabilities, and then our African-American students. Unfortunately, we don't have a big enough population size to always represent that data, but it's definitely a focused and targeted area for us, subgroup. So when you look at the change from 2022 to 2023, you see a lot of fluctuation. I looked at that data and I thought a lot of it really has to do with, these are different cohorts. So when you say third grade in 2022 compared to 2023, it's a whole different group of third graders. So you're going to see more consistency with the group as a whole, but then our subgroups, we're only looking at our students with special needs. We're only looking at about 30 students, and our ELs kind of similarly in Albany. We're at about 25% English learners in our district. So you're not going to see huge you might see huge fluctuations, but understanding it's a small focus group. So some of our strengths, I mean, we saw in our eighth graders really did a lot of growth we see, and then we're not seeing so much with our third grade. Slide. Okay, what curriculum is used? We too are a units of study school district. We adopted it about 7 years ago. We are not in full implementation of it, though we're using the writing more than the reading. What we've done since learning about the need for a change is that we've added a lot of supplemental materials. So we use Wilson language foundations for our kinder and first grade, and they are teaching phonics using that program. And then we're using for second and third grade, and we're kind of, honestly, we're kind of all over the place with our curriculum because we've been buying things. We do use SIPs for second and third. We are really happy with SIPs, and this has all been sort of on a trial basis, right? So we're trying it for different grades. We've been using SIPs for a long term with our tier 2 intervention teachers started using SIPs a long time ago. And we brought that into second and third grade. We also use Heggerty. We use secret stories. We use rewards, quick reads, all kinds of different areas or different curricula that we've incorporated into our teaching. For our tier 3, we use SIPs also. We use Spire, and we use Heggerty, rewards, and quick reads. And then our middle school, we don't have an adopted curriculum for our middle school, but we use a variety of texts that the teachers all use in unison. We use the National Geographic, McDougall-Little, California Literature inside. We use rewards at the tier 2 level, and then we use Spire again for our tier 3. Rewards, Step Up to Writing, and EdMark reading program. Slide. Okay, so for our screeners, we use FastBridge. FastBridge early reading is a one-on-one assessment that's given to kinder and first grade, and that is it counts as a dyslexia screener right now. And I put N and not sure about the IDA aligned because I couldn't find any lists that the International Dyslexia Association offered to tell me if we were IDA aligned, so I'm not sure. But anyway, early reading for kinder and first. And then for our screener for 2nd through 8th grade, we use A reading, which is a computer adaptive test. And it's a screener, like I said, it's based on the Common Core. We also use CBM reading, which is a curriculum-based measure. And we use that for 2nd and 3rd grade as a screener, and then we use it again for progress monitoring. So some of our 2nd and 3rd grade, or some of our teachers use it at every grade, and then our intervention teachers use it for progress monitoring for our intervention programs. And then at, yeah, I think that takes care of everything at middle school. Like I said, we are using A reading and in middle school as well, and auto reading. Okay, slide. Professional development. So we too have embarked on the science of reading professional development. And we started off last year by having a consultant come in, Margaret Goldberg, who's very well known with Reading Rockets, etc. She came in and did some professional development that was optional for our teachers. And a lot of our teachers were really engaged in that. And we saw the need to bring a full course of study in. So we contracted with the Los Angeles County Office of Ed, and they offer a program called Getting Reading Right. And Getting Reading Right is a 10-part series, and it's offered basically monthly throughout the school year. We're on session 8, I think we're about to embark on. And their training is based on Scarborough's Reading Rope. They also offer consultancy, which we're not currently using, but they're funded through the California grant. And our teachers we have all teachers attending this series, and that includes our specialists, special ed teachers, reading specialists, ELD teachers. We even have science teachers doing this, and PE teachers. So our idea is that we are going to just educate everybody about what the science of reading is so that we have a common understanding. That's really the goal of this year. But as a side benefit of all this is that our teachers have really been engaging with it. And so they have offered us a lot of free resources and a lot of ideas for how we can actually implement the science of reading in the classroom. And so that's the really good news. When we did a survey, I recently did a survey, and we asked, what do you feel about the training? We heard overwhelming positivity from our K through 3, basically. And 4 or 5 gave us a little bit of feedback saying like, well, it's not really it's more geared towards primary. We don't know if this applies to us. So Getting Reading Right program offered us to attend their secondary training, which is really, really good. I've been attending all of them, but those are more geared towards the secondary classroom. And so we also have the recordings from those. So our 4th and 5th grade are engaging in those. And then the question of coaching support, we don't have literacy coaches, unfortunately, but we do have reading interventionists or reading specialists at our sites. For all 3 elementary schools, we have 1 full-time person at each site. They have been really integral in this process. And so they've guided me, they've worked with teachers, and they support students so they really can see and monitor what works. And then they've also helped with us really figuring how we can tell if what we're doing is working by progress monitoring. So we're happy to have them. We have not been training our paraeducators, but that's planned for the future. And then we are not training 6 middle school or high school, but again, we're looking into that for possibly next year. Slide. Oh, that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Alameda Unified School District with I could either read it off of the slide or the list I have here, but Nancy Lay, who's the Language and Literacy Coordinator, Shandini Stanley, the Academic MTSS Program Manager, Tanya Harris, the Elementary Director, and Kristen Zazau, if I'm saying that correctly, the Assistant Superintendent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Lai. I'm sorry I have my mask on. There was bug sprayed around my cubicle, so I'm trying to avoid the toxicity. I'm here with my colleagues Tanya and Chandani, and if we could proceed forward to the next slide. This is our 3rd and 8th grade data for 2022-23. We have some bright spots. I think some of this data has been updated in the deck, so hopefully you'll have the N numbers for all of the student populations. We have bright spots around our multi-ethnic, our Asian, our socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and our multilingual students who are redesignated. We actually added multilingual students because they're another student group we're paying a lot of attention to. I do want to note that the proficiency rates for English learners, as you can see, are quite low, and that's because English proficiency is the bar that moves our student out of the category. So those students get snatched immediately out and are reclassified, and those then become our redesignated students. And you can see the big difference between English learners and redesignated. We'll be speaking a little bit later to our theory of action to address these persistent, disproportionate inequities in our literacy data for African American, Black, Hispanic, Latinx, and students with IEPs. I think one thing to celebrate is that unlike the state, AUSD recovered to pre-pandemic achievement levels in 2022. Obviously, we want the achievement levels to be far less disproportionate and, shall we say, equitable, but this is where we currently are. Well, I'll also say, and we'll have a table for this indicated, is that we're showing how we're outperforming the state in several subgroups. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. This is our ELA curricula that we use in our elementary and middle school levels. We don't have the image, but I think many of you all are familiar with Scarborough's rope. And as I suspect occurs in many other districts, we use it as a touchstone document so that we're really explicit to ourselves about the complexity of skills that need to be taught and acquired in order to be a skilled reader. And to us, that's everything that makes up the science of reading. And we use the Scarborough's rope framework or image to help us focus ourselves in trainings and as an organizing structure as we're codifying our district-wide literacy framework, and then also as a check when we're auditing instructional materials and when we think about our assessments. Let's see. So we primarily are using Center for the Collaborative Classroom in the elementary tier 1 classroom, and that's made up of 3 discrete programs under that umbrella of CCC: being a reader, making meaning, being a writer. Being a reader is the portion of the program that attends to the foundational literacy skills. And then we have also supplemented in the upper grades with a program called Inquiry by Design. So I will say, though, this is what we currently have, and our engagements with teachers and our own analysis of the materials and anecdotal data shared with us by our instructional coaches. Like, we have lots of areas for refinement in terms of the curricula. So one example is that in our tier 1 elementary curriculum, we're not really that happy with the quality of our handwriting materials. And there's some gaps around mini lessons focused on phonics instruction, and those are the needs that the teachers have mentioned for us. At the secondary level, really talking about how IBD, Inquiry by Design, feels insufficiently scaffolded or differentiated. And I think that's it for this slide. We'll move on to the next one. This is our suite of multiple measures. I won't read through them all, but the assessment we really want to spotlight is the second one down, called STAR CBM. Before I do that, I want to share that we're also in the process of updating our report cards to be more informative and specific so that they're actually powerful tools for families. And in April, we'll be asking for family feedback on those templates. Our research into STAR CBM actually preceded SB 114, which, as everyone knows, outlines the new requirements for screening students in K through 2 for reading delays. We've historically used the first line, the STAR reading and the STAR early literacy, to screen for reading difficulties in grades 1 through 12, and an internal assessment in kindergarten. And those were all approved in California for intervention screening. And what we are understanding is that STAR reading / early literacy combined with STAR CBM, that second row, has been approved as a universal screener for reading delays, including dyslexia, in about 20 states. And we are piloting it in anticipation of it as an approved universal screener in California. I think the timeline for when we'll get an official list from the CDE has been pushed back a little bit. And so we wanted to get ahead of the game before we got the official kind of word of what different assessments will be approved. And so we've been really investing in students taking this assessment and teacher capacity in learning how to use this particular new assessment. Next slide, please. Something that we've also done in district is this literacy assessment matrix. And I'm going to actually throw to Chandani to share the incredible work she did here.
Good evening. Hi. So when I created the matrix, what I did was a crosswalk with the discrete skills for each of the assessments that we use. We wanted to make sure that the combination of the multiple screeners that we have are actually covering the assessment, and the assessments are covering all the necessary skills that we wanted to make, that we want to make sure we're looking at. On this particular slide, it's hard to see the scope of them because the document goes out really wide. There are 56 skills that we're looking at. And so as far as phonemic awareness goes, we're looking at skills such as initial and final sounds, blending, long and short vowels, multisyllabic words, rapid naming, phonemic deletion. And again, like I said, there's 56 of them. We are doing this because it helps us really pinpoint, based on concerns with each student, which assessments we might select to find out where the students' strengths are, as well as their areas of need so that we can support them best. Next slide, please.
So this is I believe our final slide, which is speaking to our professional development plan. Beyond what's written here, this is actually not telling the whole story of some positive shifts that we've had in terms of, for the first time, we have protected teacher collaboration time on a weekly basis. And that time is really designed to allow teachers to analyze student data and implications for their co-planning and instruction. And so we're seeing grade levels and sites prioritizing literacy during that collaboration. And actually the majority of our sites have a specific focus on language and literacy written into their SIPSAs, their school plan for student achievement. So if you look all the way at the top of the top row of that chart is the 2 contractual days for TK through 2, because really our theory of action is that if we focus really intensively on strengthening our systems around foundational literacy skills, the curricula, the assessments, the training, and really in service of learning to read, then we're going to build a base for students to transition to learning to read, and then hoping to see some positive outcomes related to the 3-5 SBAC scores at the upper elementary span. Going back to this, something that we did with those 2 contractual days were full day 2 full days of conference style literacy learning to deepen teachers' understanding of both instructional practice and assessment dives. And there were about 12 topics that represented a subset of the total sessions that were provided over the 2 days. So high frequency words through orthographic mapping, phonological awareness, and then SIPS 101, which is one of the programs that we use for intervention, as well as assessment dives. So going back to what I was saying about the assessment of CBM, that was the opportunity for teachers to understand the purpose of why we are looking for this new assessment and why they should be excited to implement and figure out what the student data looked like from there. So I think one of the questions was, really how are teachers responding to it? And then we had about 96.3% of about I want to say more than 100 teachers reporting that they were going to implement a learning from that day, with many commenting specifically about SIPs and orthographic mapping. And I see I have 1.5 minutes remaining. I think, Chanani, if you can speak to both OG and SIPs, I know that that slide I think is not available, but she can add a little bit more flavor to those two, because they are 2 sub projects that are quite high priorities as we think about literacy here in Alameda.
Sure. So with Orton Gillingham in Alameda, we've been training all of our mild moderate case managers for over 10 years now. So as they come in, we're training them on the multisensory structured literacy approach of teaching reading. And I don't know, I mean, an example of this method can be if we're going to add multisensory into teaching for a student who does not know how to blend. We might be using a sandboard, or we might be using a sand card, or we might be using a blending board with Alconin boxes. So we have boxes so that they can move as they are learning how to blend the sounds together, again, to add that multisensory component in. We've also been adding a lot of I don't know, I got so much information here, but so I'm going to move to SIPs because I can't see the clock. But with the SIPs material, we decided that we spent about $75,000 on SIPs so that all of our elementary schools could use the SIPs as an intervention during RTI. And Tanya Harris, our senior director of elementary, and I have been going to each site to kind of get a fidelity check of how the intervention is being used and what sites might need, so that we can make sure that the implementation can happen in an impactful way, and that we are providing the appropriate supports that each site needs. We want to make sure that we're actually looking at each site and each site's needs, rather than a global look at just what the district might need. And we're still gathering information on that so we can move forward and use this in the best way that to support kids and teachers for next year and this year. Nancy, I'm throwing it back to you.
I think that was our last slides, unless I'm mistaken.
That's great timing. Okay, thank you so much. All right, the last presentation we have is from Piedmont Unified School District, presented by the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, Ariel Dolowich.
Yes. All right. Thank you. I know I'm last, so I'll try to keep it brief and open it up for the Q&A. Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. And you can see here with the change both at 3rd and 8th grade that we have had a recent decline when you look at specific ethnicities. For example, our Hispanic Latino declined just a little bit, as did our group with two or more races. But if you look at the bar graph, just at the visual for what it's worth in terms of meets and exceeds, similar to Albany, we're a fairly high-performing district. And so over 80% of our students have met or exceeded. And so that's something to take into account. Also, just to mention, for instance, certain subgroups like African-American and socioeconomically disadvantaged, we have less than 30 in each category. So it's obviously NA for reporting purposes at the state level. Next slide. So just to disaggregate this, one step further, you can see here that we had a little bit of growth with our white and Asian students, just a small positive change. And then, as mentioned, Latino and, for example, our students with disabilities declines. I think, as mentioned by an earlier presenter, it's not necessarily the same students that we're monitoring when looking at this data. So it's more helpful for progress monitoring purposes to follow the same student group throughout. But the data itself definitely catches our attention. But one thing just to note, when you look at, again, meeting and exceeding, even though, for example, Hispanic Latino declined almost 9 percentage points, for our 8th graders, for example, 78% are still meeting and exceeding, which is significantly above the state average. Likewise, for example, if you look at students with 2 or more races, declines at the 8th grade level by 9.3%. But again, it's going from 94.6 to 85.3. So 85% of those students in that subgroup are meeting or exceeding standards. Just to note, the relative context of declining, and at the same time, still very proud of all of our students. If you go to the next slide. So we are also units of study district, and we're on the early end of a journey, probably year 2, with phasing out units of study. So last year we adopted from phonics to reading, TK through 3. This year we're piloting spellography, grades 4 and 5. Similar to previous districts, listening to our teachers, specifically word study, spelling, and writing have been challenges at the upper grade, especially when you take into account previous training with units of study. So as we're transitioning to science of reading, and I'll touch upon it with the professional development, we're partnering with California Reading and Literature Project, the director, George Ellis from UC Berkeley, and that has been fantastic. We just completed module 1 of 6, and we're getting the entire TK through 5 staff trained by the end of winter next year. So 3 modules this year, 3 modules next year, and then listening to some of our earlier presenters. I don't know if my slides survived at the end of this deck, but I have some information there on CRLP. And then primarily for Tier 2 and Tier 3, we use Orton Gillingham, and it was mentioned beautifully by Albany around the multisensory, and also just structured techniques really focused, for example, when we look at blending cat and then having the motion with at for our students in terms of blending that. Some of our teachers also do use Wilson, and then they supplement, for instance, with structured literacy routines that have been developed over time. But those are our Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, and you can see, let's see, with From Phonics to Reading and Spellography, they do meet science of reading alignment. And so that is something we're intentional about and thoughtful. We're continuing to supplement, but we don't have the investment bandwidth to do a whole-scale adoption at this point. Next slide. So Dibbles adopted last year, and then we provide information 3 times a year for families, and then Scholastic Reading Inventory. At the grade 4, 5 levels, if students aren't meeting, then we follow up with Dibbles in terms of a screener to drill down more intentionally, and then we continue SRI assessment grades 6 through 12. So that continues, and like I mentioned, From Phonics to Reading, K3, then Spellography 4 through 12 in terms of newly or will be newly adopted supplemental curriculum for units of study. Next slide. So I mentioned California Reading and Literature Project. I have a few slides which detail the focus. We have our next all-district training next week, and then the 3rd module in April, and then we'll resume August, September, and then before the winter break to finish all 6 modules. They also provide coaching. We have 3 cohorts. We have a cohort of administrators, both district and site, with CRLP staff. We also have a literacy leadership team, which is comprised of teacher leaders, at least 2 from every elementary school, as well as program specialists and an MTSS coordinator. And then at the secondary level, we're utilizing our reading specialists in terms of providing professional development and then follow-up coaching directly for teachers. So that's happening at the secondary level. I think it's mentioned earlier. It really has been an emphasis with our elementary schools to focus on the science of reading, and there's still some work to be done at the secondary levels. Next slide. Oh, okay. So the other slides were removed.
Supposed to be over at 8. The Q&A is just about to start, and
All right. Well, thank you. I'll turn it over to the facilitator for the Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate all the work that each district had to put in to generate and create the slides and gather all the data and present it for this meeting. Thank you very much. And there's many things happening across the board at various districts that are very strong. And I believe now we have some questions in the chat to be asked. And
yep, I could get you started, Dr. Futterman. The first
Okay.
question is, how did districts assess whether programs or practices are aligned to the Science of Reading / International Dyslexia Association standards? Was that one of the questions that the districts responded to, Lindsay? I apologize. I'm getting confused between the questions being asked and that were part of the
They
presentation.
put a Y and an N in their slide deck. But we didn't hear how they assessed whether they met the standards or not.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. I wanted to make sure that that was a question intended for the Q&A. Thank you so much. So let me pull that one back again and ask it again. How did districts assess whether programs or practices are aligned to the Science of Reading and/or the International Dyslexia Association standards? And I assume that's for all districts.
okay. So hopefully each district understands the question. I don't know if there's a way to maybe like pop it up, but Emery, would you like to respond to that first? So that would be Dr. Milikel. Sorry. These are names.
Well, I don't know that we do, to be honest, yet. We are in the very initial stage of this process. So that is something we need to work on. I can't say
Okay.
that.
Yeah, and then I just in case people aren't aware, there is a defining guide on what the Science of Reading is. It's free. That's put out from the Reading League and also the International Dyslexia Association. It was in the question. They have their own set of knowledge standards as well that are pretty much in alignment with SB 488, which is the generation of our new teacher performance expectation 7 on effective literacy instruction. So all those pieces align. So those are great resources. What would Dr. Wells like to respond to that question, or Michelle Sinclair from Albany about determining if your curriculum is in alignment with the Science of Reading and/or IDA aligned?
I can, Dr. Wells.
Sure.
Okay. I know that units of study are not based on, the publicity that it's all received. But I do know that SIPS is because the Reading League list I'm aware of. I wasn't aware of the IDA list, which is good to have. So now I know, but yeah, SIPS, we're looking at SIPS, Haggerty, all those programs are listed on that list.
Okay, great. And then Alameda, whoever would like to answer.
So similarly with our, if we look at our curriculum, what we used is indicators that are from the Reading League, but I think we actually were I know it's in the chat that IBD is not science of reading. And we really thought long and hard about that one because if you consider the full braid of reading skills in Scarborough's rope, which includes vocabulary and understanding language and verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge, then yes. If we're only thinking about word recognition skills like coding or high frequency word recognition, because it's not typically taught in a grade level class at the middle school's grades and up, that's why we were like, okay, if we look at it through this lens, yes. If we look at it through another lens, no. And I think there was a question in the chat, like, what are folks doing around middle grades and up? And so this was one of the slides that we weren't able to share. We are in the research and discovery process of what effective research-based training and materials are available to support middle and high school teachers to provide targeted reading intervention supports to middle schools, because we are seeing from our STAR reading data that there continues to be gaps in proficiency and achievement in reading. And then those we would need more information and then have to have a developmentally appropriate reading intervention program for those adolescent students, because obviously what we don't want to do is put our elementary materials in front of those and have them feeling stigmatized. We want those materials to feel teenager appropriate and also be, we hope, slightly interesting to them as they're tackling their early literacy skills.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Piedmont, would you like to respond?
Sure. I think similarly, we knew units of study didn't meet science of reading predictably. And then we have a tool with CRLP from UC Berkeley in order to evaluate pilot curriculum that we're using. And then just being intentional in terms of the purpose around SB 488 and ensuring that we have, we're going to update some of our assessments and then also maintain our screeners.
Okay. Excellent. And then Berkeley.
Yes. So I think I mentioned as part of the presentation, so Berkeley is currently a little more at the halfway point of a legal settlement with regard to our work with literacy. And as part of that settlement, we have contracted with an outside consultant, Dr. Kim Gibbons, who runs the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement out of the University of Minnesota. She and her team have been working pretty diligently on creating a very detailed toolkit to review curriculum across the elementary grades in these key foundational components for literacy. So that includes phonemic awareness, phonics and orthology, vocabulary fluency, comprehension, writing and spelling, and also includes assessment, culturally responsiveness, accessibility, and usability. Berkeley Unified was in the second round of her center's use of that tool in spring of last year. She and her team completed the tool in January. Even it's probably one of the most tools I think that currently exists in the nation. And so we did review our TCRWP and Fast Track to Phonics with an internal team in Berkeley. We knew that it was important, given the longevity of TCRWP and the cultural shifts going to be necessary to support a curricular change, that we had to do that review with teachers and our educators so that the felt experience wasn't that this was done to them. We've got all the research reports, et cetera, but it was really important for us to ensure that teachers had that experience so that they could see for themselves and then be able to share out with others how this review was conducted, the toolkit that was used, and then moving from that, we went into the core training, which again reinforces all of these components. Since that time, Dr. Gibbons and her team have just completed a review of nationally available curriculum. And so we're going to be using that as a starting place for our own curriculum adoption. They started with 42 national curriculum, and right now they've identified 5 that meet their criteria within the context of this toolkit that outlines critical components that are necessary for each of the grade levels, along with red flags that shouldn't be included in a literacy curriculum. And they've identified 5 curriculum that were at least % of the look-fors and had no red flags. They're in a process of a review and appeal process for curriculum that did not meet those initial criteria. So the complete list is not yet there, but that will be the starting place for our own curriculum work, adoption
Okay,
work.
thank you very much. Do we have, oh, I know we have many questions, but Carolyn, did you want to?
Yep, the second
some
question I
names?
just dropped into the chat.
Okay.
Someone asked,
Okay.
could the presenters or the moderator specify what the state benchmarks are? I think during the presentation, we heard a lot of comparison to the state benchmarks. And how do those benchmarks compare to high-performing districts in the state? And how do the California state benchmarks compare to those of high-performing states?
Yeah, so I believe the 2022 data for California as a state is approximately 31% of all third graders met or exceeded standards in English language arts. And then nationally, it's around it's not the CAS scores, it's the NAEP scores. So the NAEP scores are looking at 4th graders and 8th graders. And again, it's around 35% nationally of 4th graders are at or above benchmark for reading. So it's a nationwide problem. I was looking it up during the during this presentation, so if my numbers are not precise, but that is approximate. So in California, we are, not the highest nationally, and then we are behind in terms of our universal screener. We have 40 states in the country that have been using a universal screener for reading risk. Some states for multiple years. And so we, as Nancy had mentioned, we will be mandated to screen all students kindergarten through 2nd grade starting in the fall of 2025. So I hope that answers that question. What would be the next question, Carolyn? Is there a number 3?
Before we move on, Dr. Futterman, I just wanted to extend the opportunity to our district presenters in case they wanted to add anything
yes.
to what you just presented.
Absolutely.
I'll take silence. There's nothing to add.
Did any presenter want to add any more details that maybe they know around the data? So you can see within this particular SELPA, we have some very high performing districts in comparison to the state average. So please ask all the districts how they are teaching language comprehension using reading science in middle schools. Most reading programs are targeting word recognition only. Again, Nancy sort of alluded to this, so that in grades 6 through 12, you're typically focusing on the upper level of the reading rope, which is around language comprehension, text structure, vocabulary knowledge, all those components. But if each district wants to address how they're approaching that, I guess in grades 6 through 8, it's specifically around middle school instruction.
I would love to jump in, but would I be able to share my screen to show the Scarborough's rope as like a visual? Is that possible?
I'm not the co-host, but if one of the hosts or co-hosts would like to give her
you should be able to share, Nancy.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, here we go. Now everyone has disappeared. All right, here y'all are back again. So I think what I was trying to say earlier, and maybe not as clearly as I would have liked, is that when we're thinking about whether our materials, our assessments, our training are attacking all of the skills that students need to be proficient readers, we're talking about these 7 very broadly, and then Chandani actually was talking about, actually it's when we're getting down to the granular level at the assessments, there are more than 50 different skills that we're looking for. Each of these break down even further. And so I think as we were grappling with the question about whether IBD is a science of reading aligned curriculum, well, it's absolutely not science of reading aligned if we only think about phonological awareness, or we're only thinking about phonics and high frequency word recognition, because that is not grade level appropriate for a 6th through 12th grader. Now, I want to acknowledge, and I am a former teacher who taught 11th graders with a 2nd or 3rd grade reading level. And so it was very apparent that some of them did not have or had not acquired these skills. But middle school curricula tend to address these more advanced skills that require all of these word recognition foundational skills in order for students to feel really confident and able to demonstrate their knowledge in these areas. Of course, there's specific strategies that are used to teach, for example, language structures, vocabulary. And then, as I was saying, I think in the secondary world, it's really important for us to be making sure that the grade level content is addressing all of this stuff and is not, for lack of a better word, dumbed down. And for all the students who need additional intervention supports, that we are finding materials that can support them to learn these skills in a way that is developmentally appropriate and honoring who they are as little young adults in the world.
Thank you.
Okay, I will stop
I
sharing.
do want to also just mention that there are advanced levels of both phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, syllabication rules, morphology, all of that needs to continue to be instructed in grades 6 through 12 so that students can then develop and expand their vocabulary and spelling of more complex words. So that's all right.
I just let me add here,
yeah.
because I think it's critically important to note that when we're talking about student achievement and literacy for all students, and you're honing in, for example, the middle grades, you have to be able to illuminate the evidence-based practices that national and local research alludes to in terms of how best to get all of our kids up to par, and in this case, in literacy. And one of the key practices, as we study in our district, John Hattie, who is one of the chief leaders in the country around student achievement. And one of the essential practices that we must adhere to and include in any program we adopt or participate in, and that is making sure we're intentional about having our assessments that are aligned with our state standards. And once they administer, that we are very intentional about doing small things that give you big results. One of which is being intentional about having time for teachers to collaborate and go through data protocols and looking at the what and then getting into the how to make sure all kids have an opportunity with our tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, to meet and exceed grade level standards. And when we start talking about equity, which must be fused and a central part of this work, we have to look at our students who have historically been disenfranchised and low performing. I appreciate the question around the African American students. We didn't present our data because they're so few, but we do have it manually. Our African American students are just above 50%, nowhere near where our Asians are, around 80%. And for us, that's a focus. But these evidence-based practices have to be incorporated in these kind of programs like Science of Reading. And so I just want to make sure we make a special note of that, because otherwise we may miss that. So I needed to add that piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just tagging on to what Dr. Wells said, I mean, that was our reference to really trying to focus on literacy systems I don't know if I have access to share my slides, and I think I saw in the comments that the full slide deck that we submitted would be included in the appendix. But there are really key components that you have to focus on, and I saw a lot of head nods while Dr. Wells is talking about, but this notion you have to have the infrastructure to be able to support the work, which includes collaboration through professional development, valid and reliable data that come through these assessments, which I think was the motivation behind that particular question for all of us to ask. It's not just having the assessments, it's administering the assessments and then having systems and processes for staff to be looking at those assessments and using them both as benchmark and to progress monitor. The other component is about the capacity building, right? How we're providing professional learning for our educators. And I think that it was you, Mila, who talked about we have a really small real estate when it comes to professional development, that professional development time that's available to us with each of the districts, and how leaders in the organization have to make strategic decisions about using that professional development time when literacy sits in a context of math and science and social studies and ELD and assessment and SEL and behavior supports and chronic absenteeism, which I appreciated again, Mila, your slides situated the academic data in this context of the work that you're doing to decrease chronic absenteeism, which has been critically important. That capacity building also includes instructional coaching. In Berkeley, we're really fortunate to have a local measure that supports literacy TSAs and RTI TSAs, in addition to some of our LCAP, and we're going to be having to make some strategic decisions as we head into a year that is going to be a resource reduction year for BUSD, but that capacity building and the financial resources and time to support it are also critical for supporting a literacy system. And then the last piece there, then the instructional resources, both the instructional resources in terms of the curriculum that a district is choosing to adopt, but also in resources like time and personnel. And all of those things have to be in place in order to effectively, efficiently, and proactively and productively address the leadership challenge, particularly with regard to the disparities that we're seeing for particular student focal groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Oops, we have the next question. Can someone explain how districts with wealthy and highly educated parents can mask how poor a reading curriculum is? I'll say that again. So can someone explain how districts with wealthy and highly educated parents mask how poor a reading curriculum is?
Well, I'm in a fairly affluent and high-performing district in Piedmont, and I'm in month 7 here. This journey that began last year, I will say, there was a moral imperative at the board level and in the community to mask it no longer, which is why From Phonics to Reading and Dibbles happened in an accelerated fashion, almost too much of an accelerated fashion in terms of buy-in. And we talk about teachers really feeling heard, and in terms of their collaboration being meaningful around processes and systems to collaborate. So there's a little bit of healing to be done, but I would say, at least in this district and this community specifically, the mask came off last year.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and saying that.
Let me add that in Albany, somewhat similar, we are known as a high-performing district. And I think that's a mask, because when you start to disaggregate the data, we discovered that our historically disenfranchised children were the ones who were not performing, and they were actually regressing. And that was happening because there was no intentionality to close the achievement gap. and to engage in equitable like practices. And so we spent a few years training our board, starting at the top, what equity was all about. And so that in our and as we start to move the needle, we start to see our African American students and our brown students start to close the gap. And that's critical work in this context. And I didn't want us to be just confined to the science of reading, but also include, as I mentioned before, those evidence-based kinds of practices. And so in our LCAP, and all this stuff has to be connected. It can't be done in isolation. And then looking at those practices that give you the biggest growth. And that was our capacity building. We were some had more capacity than others. And so we had to establish what is the minimum capacity that everybody needs in order to move all of our kids. And that comes through professional development. And one of our biggest holes that we're grappling with and we're currently filling is the literacy coaching and follow-up and reflection and making that part of our practice moving forward. And so we find that to be important and essential, coupled with the welcoming the science of reading. What we discovered in full transparency is that we had a lot of hit and misses prior to exploring the science of reading. And with the science of reading, it allows us to fill a number of holes that we had. And so I applaud the folks who are pushing the issue around science of reading, but I also want us to remain open that it's the science of reading and evidence-based practices that have to be brought together as a way to have it where there are no more achievement gaps, and that all really means all, as reflected in future data and current data as we begin to close these gaps.
Thank you. Thank you
I'd
very
like to
much.
also add one more thing, is
Yes.
that the approach we've used for many years is balanced literacy, right? And when you compare that to structured literacy and the whole idea of units of study and this idea of the 3 queuing model, and that students should just look at the picture and guess what it is, that relies on a lot of background knowledge, and that relies on a lot of practice at home. And maybe the students who need more are getting it outside. So I think that our awareness, I think when you know better, you do better. And just having the training alone, we've seen a huge impact on just the training. So the curriculum is going to come around because there really isn't anything out there right now. And we are looking every day, and we're waiting. But right now, all we can do in Albany, at least, is supplement. And so that's what we're doing, and learn and understand what we've been doing wrong and how we can do better.
Yeah, and I would say for Berkeley, it is not at all mass. I think even prior to Jill and I coming on board July of last year, it was very apparent that Berkeley recognized just the inequities in terms of outcomes and experiences of our babies. But I think what is not hard to notice it and identify it, it's the challenges in figuring out how to respond to what likely every district that's on the screen has identified for years. The issues are persistent, and I think I applaud Berkeley for the many ways that it tried to respond. You heard Jill mention our Measure H, our BSEP, where members of our community, paid for a parcel tax that allows our schools to have reading coaches and interventionists, et cetera. There's been a number of resolutions passed by our board and just a number of efforts across our district across the years to address the inequities in terms specifically of reading outcomes. What we're trying to do, and we've been doing over the last 18 months, is really aligning and coordinating all those things to build the infrastructure to make sure that whatever we do, and it's not just curriculum, will actually sustain, building those systems. So when we came, there was tons of data, but not the right data, not consistent data, and everybody wasn't even collecting data the same way. So we took the time to build a data system, and now are putting into place data routines for our staff and our teams to look at data so we can actually pinpoint exactly where the inequities are showing up, where in the instruction are there gaps, and then how do we intervene? Looking at building out our MTSS structure. So thinking about not just tier 1, that's critical, and we're doing that, but also what are our tier 2 interventions, what's working, what's not working. So that data system and that data informed culture was critical for us in Berkeley as we try to address the inequities. And then again, making sure that we're all speaking the same language in terms of our pedagogy and our practices to address the reading issues. And then let's again be honest, I feel like I've been here before, or said it before, mindset is a thing. And so I do want us to not, try to address a complex and persistent issue in a very simple and oversimplified way. And so I'm super excited about the direction that we're headed in Berkeley, because again, we're taking all of these resources, all of these supports, and really systematizing them so that they can sustain beyond all of our tenure and actually get results for our students, and that our teachers are aligned in these PDs and actually learning, not just so they can pick the right curriculum, because we're into the beginning stages of our curriculum adoption, but so that they can also be critical consumers of curriculum, and they themselves can know and understand how reading is acquired, and know when and where to intervene when students are not getting it the first time, the second time, et cetera. I always think about this quote by Dr. Barbara Holmes from her book, Race in the Cosmos. And it says, "I agree that the social situation is urgent, but frantic responses to resilient problems will not solve anything." And I think one of the things that plagues us in traditional public education is that we all agree that this is an urgent issue, but how we go about trying to solve it oftentimes is is frantic and fragmented, and we're really trying to figure out how to do it in a way, again, that is coherent, aligned, research and evidence-based, so that it can sustain, again, beyond all of our tenures. And I think I heard that echoed in all the other comments as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And again, really appreciate the work of all the districts who came tonight and gathered the data and the information and your plans and your professional development and everything that everybody is working on together. And hopefully by hearing what other districts are doing, you all can collaborate with each other as well, and maybe even additional districts who are not part of this SELPA. I don't know whether Caroline or whomever has closing remarks to wrap up everything.
Well, I know we're at time. Folks are able to stay. I'd love to pop in 2 more questions, but I totally understand if you need to leave. And if that is the case, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate your time and your willingness to make a presentation to the Community Advisory Committee this evening. But if you're able to stay, I'm going to drop the next question into the chat. I don't think we're going to be longer than maybe 5 or 6 more minutes. So the next question is, how many of the districts include administration, including the district offices, and the professional development on the science of reading?
If you don't mind me answering, I do have to hop off, but appreciate the question. And so yes, in BUSD, again, we talked about alignment and coherence. And so all of our site leaders, all of our principals and assistant principals are engaged in the same professional development, a little bit tweaked for site leaders that our teachers are engaged in, as well as all of our coaches, our interventionists, as well as our district staff as well. So again, because we're making a whole district system shift, we're making sure that all of us are engaged in understanding the science of reading, understanding the curriculum, and understanding what good literacy instruction looks like. So we're all doing it together.
In our district, it's the same. Administrators participate in all the professional development that we offer, regardless of what it is.
In Albany, we're also, all our elementary principals are participating. Our district, Dr. Wells is participating, and some district staff as well. And we are also doing Getting Reading Right offers an administrator's training once a month, and we're participating in that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, last question in the chat, and thank you so much for staying on. I appreciate it. The key features of structured literacy are the systematic, cumulative, explicit, sequential, and diagnostic methodology. Can the districts address how cobbling together numerous supplemental materials is not really in alignment with the structured literacy approach?
But that's an interesting question, because we do have state standards that we have to adhere to. And so we also have our core, our core adoption. And so sometimes we have to have supplementals to backfill those areas that we need to beef up. And so as we start to look and explore and adopt the science of reading, we also have to continue to adhere to our state standards. And so one of our challenges and a wonderful opportunity is how do we blend those two together in terms of making them our district standards. And so supplemental become a critical piece to help us have complete alignment. We don't see it as being more disjointed. We see it as having adequate resources to fulfill our kids' needs. And so supplemental is critical, and it shouldn't be looked at as something that's just the opposite.
I agree completely with Dr. Wells. We make sure that our core curricula are all aligned with state standards and are rich and interesting to students. There are some missing pieces that we try to use various resources to complement with, and the more resources teachers have, the better they address the diverse needs of various learners. So it's not about how many resources you have, of course, although more resources is better than less resources when you need them, but it's also how teachers use them, how teachers diagnose students' needs, and how teachers find ways to address those needs. So the more the better. It's easy not to use something if you don't need it, but when you need it, you need to have it. So it's better to have more resources than less resources. I agree with Dr. Wells on that.
Yeah, so ideally, we're building teacher knowledge around reading acquisition and reading difficulties and language acquisition. And as those of us who engage with structured literacy approaches and curriculum, no one approach program curriculum is perfect, has all the pieces. You might, for example, need something specifically for written expression, which I believe one or two of the districts has that. And then advanced reading comprehension, whether it's certain kinds of literature that does meet the standards, as Dr. Wells was saying. So and I love the literacy assessment matrix and just pinpointing all those finite skills, and then whoever is at the district is able to determine, okay, these are all the discrete skills for these specific grade levels. This is the curriculum or approaches that we have, and this is why we also need the supplemental materials. But that needs to be communicated clearly to the people who are in the classroom doing the actual teaching, and making sure that they understand which pieces for what, and to address the needs of all the students. So,
well, and that's why we provide time for collaboration for our teachers who discuss these issues and decide together which resources fit better for what needs. Like we know that our core curriculum is very, very rich, but lacking in some writing opportunities. So then we look for supplements that would complement that curriculum.
Yes, yes. And then I apologize, I don't remember which district said it, but one district said that I believe you do walkthroughs to check on the fidelity of implementation. So if, hopefully whoever's using the structured literacy approaches, that you are spot checking to see about fidelity of implementation, which would address in that question that it's systematic, cumulative, and that they are actually doing all the steps and all the components of whatever approach has been selected. So
but
go
let
ahead.
me say this about spot checking. It's important that we go deeper than spot checking, because that we go into coaching and giving feedback, because we don't want to start developing lists where we go in classrooms and we start checking it off, because we would go have a major regression. And I know that's not what you meant, but the spot checking made me nervous after being in this field for 33 years and watching what works and what doesn't work, and develop certain expertise. But again, it goes to, as we begin to grapple with what are the top 2, 3, or 4 practices that really, really make a difference in student achievement and getting all of our kids up to performance, would be building teacher capacity. And that's where the professional development comes in, and the coaching, which happens in the classroom, but not going and checking. The checking comes in the form of data protocols and having time to reflect and adjust and collaborate on how to make sure we fill those holes that our kids have and continue to build on what they're doing really, really well. I'm going to have to leave shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to say this. I really want to take a moment to thank those folks who had the courage to put this together. and bring all the districts together to have some conversation. And hopefully we can start as districts moving towards some collaboration ourselves as leaders in our respective communities, because this is what's going to change our current data, where we move towards having all kids perform, and that we just don't have this PC stuff about closing achievement gap, but taking that rhetoric and turning it into reality starts with this kind of courage to have us all come together. So I want to thank you for having the courage to do that. This work is not easy. It's a tall order, and everybody has an opinion and different perspectives, but it's okay. And so thank you, and I want to encourage you to keep doing this. And I look, as I make an I statement, I look forward to our next session where we can continue to have discussions and share what we do, and then eventually move to some collaboration and sharing where we all get better at what we do through this kind of forum. So thank you for the opportunity for Albany to come together with the rest of the districts in the immediate area.
Dr. Wells, I appreciate that convenient segue. I want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening. Special thanks to the 5 districts that comprise the North Region, SELPA, Emery, Albany, Alameda, Piedmont, and Berkeley. Thank you all so much for your presentations tonight. We welcome the opportunity to convene this group again in the future to keep our families and our communities abreast on the progress that you're making on your individual literacy programming and the data that accompanies it. Again, thank you all so much. As mentioned previously, the slide decks and this recorded presentation will be posted on the North Region SELPA CAC website. And if you're interested in becoming a member of the CAC, please refer to the chat. There's some information on there about the CAC and also a membership application. We welcome you to join this committee to help put on programming similar to this one. So thank you so much, everyone. And I apologize if I didn't get to all the questions. There's never enough time. But again, we look forward to the opportunity to reconvening this group again. And I'm sure similar questions will come up in the future. So thank you all so very much. Really appreciate your time today. And thank you, Dr. Futterman, for your amazing moderating tonight. Really appreciate you. Thank you.